I am not one of them. I never was. And the worst part is, I never even tried to be. I observed them, studied them, measured their smiles and gestures like a man studying a foreign species. I sat in my room and listened to the thudding footsteps in the hallway, the laughter muffled by cheap walls, and imagined their faces as they moved through the world with that blind, easy certainty that only the stupid possess. I told myself I was above them, that I saw through it all, that I understood what they didn't. But the truth is far uglier than that. I watched them because I needed them. I hated them because I needed them. Every contemptuous thought, every internal sneer, every time I called them cattle in my mind, it was all a disguise for this unbearable fact. Without them, I wouldn't exist. Not as I was, not as I am. I remember a time, I must have been 24, when I followed a man down the street for over an hour. He didn't notice me. Why would he? He was tall, broad, confident, the kind of man who walks as though the world were a carpet laid out for his convenience. He nodded at strangers. People nodded back. He belonged. I didn't know his name. I didn't care. I hated him instantly, not because he wronged me, but because he didn't see me. I followed him through alleyways, markets, across bridges. At one point, I imagined him turning around and recognizing me. For what, I don't know. For being alive, for suffering, for having a soul, perhaps. But he never did. He vanished into a tavern, and that was it. The hour was gone, and I, invisible, went home. They say solitude is peaceful. That is a lie invented by those who are never truly alone. Solitude is only noble in poetry. In reality, it rots you. Your thoughts, without friction, without interruption, without contradiction, become your enemies. They grow sharp, then dull, then sharp again. They mock you, they echo. And worst of all, they begin to sound like truth. I sat for years in that underground room of mine, convincing myself that I didn't need anyone, that I was superior, that the world was corrupt, but I had preserved something pure in my isolation. But what is purity if no one sees it? What is superiority if no one is beneath you? It turns out that even the desire to be above others requires others. You can't despise mankind unless you secretly crave its gaze. You think this is bitter? It is. But not in the way you imagine. I'm not angry at them for excluding me. I excluded myself. That was my choice. My power. My little rebellion. I was the one who scoffed at their promotions, their parties, their weddings and funerals. I refused their invitations. Not that they were frequent. I built my identity around refusal, around absence. I wore my solitude like a crown of thorns, parading it in front of myself each night before sleep. And still, I watched them. I watched through windows, through imagined conversations, through the noise of a cafe I dared not enter. I watched until I no longer knew whether I envied them or wanted them to envy me. I remember Liza. She came to me with nothing, and I offered her even less. Do you understand what that means? A girl like her, young, bruised, half convinced she had no worth left, stepped into my world. And I, the great observer, the philosopher of gutters, the judge of society, welcomed her with coldness, wrapped in condescension. I spoke to her not like a human being, but like a thesis. I dissected her pain. I analyzed her shame. I thought I was teaching her something. In truth, I was punishing her. For what? For seeing me, for looking into my eyes and refusing to look away. I had spent so many years trying to be unseen, but when someone finally did see me, not as I imagined myself, but as I truly was, I panicked. I struck, not with fists, but with words, with silence, with withdrawal. I punished her because she saw through the mask, and in that seeing, she made me real. I couldn't bear it. You asked me why I hated them. I didn't. I hated myself for needing them. But the self can only take so much hatred before it starts casting it outward, like a disease. I infected everyone around me. Not directly. I wasn't dramatic. I never shouted in the street. No. I destroyed things slowly through petty remarks, through absence, through cynicism disguised as intelligence. I told myself I didn't believe in love, but I memorized every face that ever turned away from me. I told myself friendship was a sham, but I watched two men embrace on the street once, and I stood there, motionless for 10 minutes, unable to breathe. They say the greatest hunger is for meaning. I disagree. The greatest hunger is to be acknowledged, even by those we despise, especially by them. There is no pleasure like the moment your enemy sees you and flinches, not out of fear, but out of recognition. That is the only moment I have ever felt alive. Not when I read books, not when I wrote essays in my mind, not when I crafted philosophies about free will and suffering. But when someone, just once, turned toward me and looked confused, as though they had seen something human in the monster they assumed was just background noise. And so I lingered in that underground room. I wrote nothing, created nothing. I merely rehearsed conversations that would never happen. Arguments where I triumphed, confessions where they wept. I imagined funerals where I did not attend, but was spoken of with regret. I imagined women mourning me, men envying me. I became an expert in dreams that humiliated reality. But reality never changed. I never became anything. I just stayed, watching, measuring, waiting for someone to say, "We see you. You were right. We were wrong to leave you behind." But no one came, because no one owed me that. They moved on. They married, they aged, they made mistakes and learned from them. And I sat there, polishing my bitterness like an heirloom, believing it made me righteous. But it only made me invisible. They didn't destroy me. They simply stopped looking. And that, my dear listener, is the true abyss. Not hatred, not violence, not even betrayal. The abyss is indifference, the quiet shrug of the world as it passes you by. So yes, I hated them, because in every one of them I saw a witness who had turned away. And in their indifference, I lost my shape. I ceased to be a man and became an echo of my own resentment. You think you can live without them? Try it. Try it long enough and you'll learn what I did. Even the most spiteful hermit needs an audience. Even the most self-sufficient mind begs for recognition. I didn't want to be loved. I didn't want to be included. I only wanted to be unavoidable. I wanted them to look at me and remember me and be unable to forget. But all I gave them were reasons to forget faster. I am not one of them, but I watch them, still, even now. I don't know when it began. Perhaps it was earlier than I dare admit, but I remember the moment I realized it for the first time, not as a suspicion, but as a certainty. I had made myself ugly, deliberately. Not in appearance, no. That would have been too easy, too forgivable. I mean something deeper, something more revolting. I crafted my own repulsiveness, like an artisan with trembling hands sculpting ugliness from silence, from awkwardness, from disdain. I built it with great care. Every grimace, every ill-timed remark, every refusal to soften when kindness was offered, these were not accidents. They were my work, my creation. Because if I was going to be rejected, let it be on my terms. You may think I'm exaggerating, that I am just being dramatic for effect. But I swear to you there is no drama in this. Only pattern, only repetition. I would meet someone, perhaps at a lecture or a small gathering, or even by chance in the street. And for a moment there would be warmth, a flicker of connection. I would feel it like a draft from an open window in winter. I would see their eyes searching, hesitating. Perhaps they saw something in me, a potential, a kindness I had forgotten I could offer. And then I would crush it. I would say something cruel, something bizarre, something calculated to end whatever might have been growing. And once the cold returned, once they pulled back, I would feel safe again. Hollow, yes, but safe. Because rejection, when it comes after you've spoiled yourself, is no longer frightening. It becomes deserved, expected, controlled. People think cruelty is born from pride, but mine came from fear. I had learned that to be vulnerable is to offer your throat to the world, and I would not do it again. There is a moment I cannot forget. A woman, nameless now, though her voice still echoes in my memory, once told me, "You make it impossible to love you." She said it not in anger, but with the kind of sadness that stains the soul. I laughed when she said it, laughed too loudly, too quickly. And I remember feeling something collapse in her, some last thread snapping. She didn't speak again, she just left. And I stood there, triumphant in my own sabotage. I had proven myself right, again. You see, I could not bear to be loved, not truly, because love, real love, demands recognition. It demands that you be seen, not as you pretend to be, but as you are. And I had spent so many years layering myself in contempt, sarcasm, and mockery that to be seen was unbearable. What if they saw through it all and still found me lacking? What if, even stripped of my armor, I was not enough? That was a risk I could not take, so I ensured the opposite. I gave them every reason to turn away before they ever reached the core. That way, it was never my soul that was rejected, only the ugliness I had so carefully displayed. I sabotaged everything: conversations, friendships, affection. I remember one evening, a colleague invited me to dinner. Nothing significant, just a polite gesture. I accepted, reluctantly, and when the night came, I arrived late, drunk, and condescending. I ridiculed the guests. I spoke in riddles. I made jokes no one could understand, and then mocked them for not understanding. I watched their discomfort grow, watched the warmth drain from their faces. And when I left, I told myself they were fools, that they hadn't appreciated my intellect. But on the walk home, I felt it. That throb in the chest that no amount of philosophy can numb. I had ruined something again. And for what? For the thrill of proving that I belonged nowhere? There is a strange power in rejection, when you are the one who causes it. You can pretend it doesn't hurt. You can pretend it was your idea, but it eats at you, slowly, quietly, like rust beneath paint. And one day you find that you have built an entire life not on relationships, not on meaning, but on avoidance. You are no longer someone who is unloved. You are someone who ensures it. And still, I wanted to be known. Isn't that the contradiction? The very people I drove away, I dreamed would return, that they would come back, not in pity, but in revelation. That they would say, "We understand. We stayed away because we thought you wanted it, but now we see the child beneath the costume, the ache beneath the insult." But they never did. Because life doesn't work that way. People don't read your secret footnotes. They believe what you show them. And I showed them ugliness. I remember staring at myself in the mirror once, not to adjust my hair or inspect a blemish, but to ask quietly, "What have you become?" There was no answer, only a face I no longer trusted. A face that had learned to twitch just so at the right moment, to smirk when feeling, to frown when sincerity approached. I had trained myself to mislead, and now I couldn't tell where the mask ended and I began. Do you understand what that does to a man? To be so entangled in your own defenses that even you can't find yourself anymore? I didn't want to be alone. I just didn't want to be abandoned. So I chose exile before anyone else could choose it for me. I chose coldness, so I'd never have to grieve the warmth. I chose mockery because silence was too unbearable, and in doing so I became exactly what I feared: forgettable, replaceable, unreal. People still speak of authenticity, of being yourself. But what if you hate yourself? What then? What if being yourself is the very thing that repels others? Do you still dare to show it? Or do you bury it beneath years of performance until even your own reflection shrugs at the sight of you? I made myself ugly, not because I was, but because I was afraid of what would happen if someone ever reached in and found beauty. Because then I would have something to lose. And I have always preferred emptiness to loss. At least emptiness doesn't leave a scar. And so I went on, tearing down every bridge before it could be crossed, painting over every welcome sign with crude sarcasm, standing in doorways just long enough to be seen, but not long enough to be known. It was safer that way. Safer, yes, but so very lonely. You think I don't know that? You think I'm proud of this? I'm not. I'm just tired. Tired of punishing others before they can hurt me. Tired of testing people until they fail. Tired of being the cause of my own abandonment and then pretending I never wanted them near in the first place. I made myself ugly, so no one would reject me, and still I sit here alone. They called me bitter, cold, righteous, detached, and I let them. It was easier that way. Easier for them to believe I simply stood above them, too principled, too morally exacting to descend into their world. I never corrected them. I nodded, sometimes even smirked, as if I had secrets they were too base to comprehend. But the truth was far more revolting. I wasn't moral. I was petty. I wasn't righteous. I was vindictive. I didn't rise above them. I waited in the shadows, measuring their smiles, their warmth, their soft hopes, and finding ways to spoil them. And the worst part is, I convinced myself I was doing it for their own good. I called it honesty. I called it clarity. But it was always revenge. There is a particular delight in ruining something beautiful and pretending it was an act of justice. I did it often. I remember a man, young, optimistic, with that unbearable glow of good intentions, who once spoke to me after a lecture. He admired my thoughts. He wanted to learn more. He looked at me not with mockery or fear, but with respect. And instead of answering his questions, I tore apart his ideas, slowly, elegantly, like slicing a flower with a razor. I quoted philosophers he hadn't read. I questioned the sincerity of his curiosity. I implied he was merely trying to impress. He laughed at first, unsure whether I was joking, and when he realized I wasn't, he nodded quietly and left. I never saw him again. That night, I told myself I had taught him something, that I had saved him from naivety. But deep down I knew I couldn't stand the way he looked at me, with hope, with openness. It made me feel like a fraud. I had to destroy it, not because I wanted to help him, but because I wanted to feel power. And the only power I had left was the ability to corrupt, to take something unspoiled and bruise it. Is that not what morality becomes when it's wielded by a coward? A weapon, a mask, a tool for domination. I quoted Kant. I spoke of the good, the true, the necessary. But behind every word was a wounded animal snarling from its cage. I didn't want justice. I wanted acknowledgement. I didn't want virtue. I wanted control. And since I could never compete in the realm of charm or success or love, I competed in righteousness. I turned bitterness into principle. And people believed me. That's the terrifying part. People believed me. They asked my opinion on serious matters. They consulted me in their moments of doubt, and I gave them poison, dressed as wisdom. I dismantled their illusions not because I loved truth, but because I hated their peace. And yet, they thanked me. Can you imagine? They thanked me for helping them see clearly. I did not correct them. I accepted their gratitude like a thief accepts applause. There is no seduction more effective than moral superiority. I used it well. I became the man who sees through everything, the one who tells it like it is. But that phrase is always a lie. No one tells it like it is. We tell it like we want to be seen, and I wanted to be seen as incorruptible, untouchable, a judge among fools. It was my costume, my armor, my disguise. But it wore me down, slowly, quietly, until I could no longer tell where the revenge ended and the man began. I started to believe my own performances. I thought I was helping people, that I was calling them out of illusion. But the only illusion was mine. I hadn't elevated myself. I had exiled myself. I had traded humanity for narrative, tenderness for cynicism, vulnerability for critique. Do you know what it's like to walk through the world seeing everything as a flaw? To speak with someone and only hear the contradictions in their tone? To watch a couple embrace and think they'll betray each other eventually? That is not wisdom. That is rot. And I mistook it for clarity. I took the rot in my own heart and projected it onto everyone else, so I would never have to face the shame of being the only one broken. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I envied them, the very people I undermined. I envied their delusions, their trust, their clumsy, fragile belief in goodness. I mocked it because I couldn't have it. I convinced myself that if I couldn't be happy, I would at least be right. And if I couldn't be loved, I would be feared. That if I couldn't connect, I would dismantle connections. That if I couldn't create beauty, I would learn to spit on it without blinking. I know what you're thinking. Why confess now? Why admit any of this? I'm not sure. Maybe because I've run out of people to perform for. Maybe because I've spent so many years sharpening the knife that I no longer recognize my own reflection in the blade. Or maybe, just maybe, because a part of me, buried beneath the rubble of all these years, still longs to be forgiven. But I don't deserve it. I know that. I have injured people, not with blood or bruises, but with words, with silences, with contempt. And worst of all, I did it in the name of morality, as if that made it clean. I never believed in sin until I saw myself using truth to humiliate, using philosophy to isolate, using logic to kill kindness in its cradle. That is sin, not the passions we lose control of, but the cold, calculated righteousness we wear to disguise our cowardice. So when you hear me speak of goodness, understand this. I don't speak as one who has lived it. I speak as one who has twisted it into a weapon. And I carry that weapon still, not because I want to use it, but because I no longer know how to let it go. Love? No. That was never the point. I never wanted love. I wanted power, not over nations, not over laws, over eyes, over mouths, over that final moment when someone looks at you wide-eyed trembling and says nothing, because words would only expose how small and helpless they feel. That is what I craved, not affection, not understanding, but surrender. And not because I was strong, but because I was terrified. Terrified of ever needing someone more than they needed me. If they begged, I was safe. If they stayed silent, I had won. If they wept, I felt alive. That's the kind of man I became. Not because I was born cruel, but because cruelty became my refuge. Somewhere along the line, I began to believe that if I could just provoke the right reaction, if I could make someone collapse in front of me, plead, break, I would finally feel that I existed. That I mattered. You think that sounds monstrous? You're right, it is. But I dare you, look deeper. Have you never wanted someone to need you more than you needed them? Have you never withheld kindness, not because you didn't feel it, but because you were afraid they might leave if you gave it too easily? That was my sickness, my strategy. I cultivated it with the precision of a priest sharpening ritual knives. And then came Liza. Poor, foolish, angelic Liza, the one I summoned like a prophet and dismissed like an insect. She walked into my room as if she belonged there, as if she didn't notice the filth, the damp, the suffocation in the air. I expected revulsion, pity at best, but she sat, listened, looked at me. She didn't look away when I spoke about humiliation. She didn't flinch when I mocked her profession. She didn't interrupt when I described the stench of my existence. She simply stayed. And I hated her for that. I hated her for seeing me, for enduring me, for treating my rot like it was still human. So I punished her. Oh yes, I wrapped it in concern, in moral lectures, in talk of redemption. I told her she was worth more, that she deserved a better life, that men would ruin her. And then I did exactly what I claimed I despised in them. I used her, not with my hands, but with my need. I used her gaze to reflect back an image of myself I could tolerate. I used her listening to silence the voices in my head. I used her compassion to feel superior. And when she reached out, not to take, but to give, I recoiled. Not because I didn't want it, but because if I accepted it, I would no longer be in control. So I rejected her. I cast her out with words sharp enough to slice open her ribs. I told her she disgusted me, that I had only pitied her, that she was nothing. I watched her freeze, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat, as if trying to understand how the same mouth that once offered salvation now spat poison. I wanted her to weep, to scream, to shatter, but she didn't. She just walked away. And in that silence I lost. Not because she left, but because she didn't beg. That was the first time I understood what I had become. Not a thinker, not a man of conscience, but a coward who wrapped his need in cruelty and called it philosophy. A beggar who insulted others for not kneeling first. I had constructed a life where every connection was a test, and I rigged every test to ensure failure. Not because I wanted to be alone, but because I wanted to prove I didn't need anyone. And when someone, by some divine accident, tried to love me, I destroyed it. Quickly, completely. Because if she had stayed, if she had insisted, if she had dared to say I love you anyway, I would have collapsed. I didn't want love. I wanted immunity. I wanted to be untouchable. But what I didn't realize is that you cannot be loved and untouchable at the same time. To be loved is to be reachable, vulnerable, breakable, and I refused to be broken. So I broke her instead. And afterward, after the echo of the door closing, after the room returned to its usual stench and silence, I sat there and waited for the triumph, the validation, the confirmation that I had protected myself again. But all I felt was cold, a kind of cold no fire can reach, a kind of emptiness so dense it hums. Days passed. I rehearsed justifications in my head. I told myself she was weak, that I had liberated her, that it would have ended badly anyway. But my chest grew heavier, my throat tighter, and when the knock finally came when she returned, I did not run to open it. I waited, I listened, I hoped, but I did not move. And when the silence remained, I knew she was gone. Not just from my room, from the fantasy, from the delusion that I could hurt people and they would keep coming back. Love? I wouldn't recognize it if it stood before me now. I would dissect it, distrust it, dismantle it, not because I want to, but because that is what I have trained myself to do. And like any well-trained beast, I obey without question. No, I didn't want love. I wanted to be wanted, endlessly, desperately. I wanted someone to crawl through my thorns and say, "I'll bleed for you." But when they did, I laughed, I mocked, I shut the door, and then I waited, hoping they'd try again. They never do. Not after the second cut. Not after they realize that you don't want them, you want their defeat. I didn't want love. I wanted them to beg. And now I sit here, surrounded by the silence of those who finally refused to kneel. I had a theory once, an ugly one, but painfully honest. If anyone ever truly loved me, they must be deluded, or desperate, or worse, stupid. That's what I told myself. That love directed at me could never be the result of clarity, of wisdom, of knowing. It must be a mistake, because if they really saw me, how could they still love me? No one loves rot, no one embraces a wound. They love illusions, and I had made myself allergic to being misunderstood kindly. So every time someone approached me with warmth, I sharpened my intellect. I prepared rebuttals, questions, traps. I wanted them to justify their affection, to prove it, and no one could. Because how do you explain the desire to hold a man who keeps thrusting daggers into your open hands? Eventually, they all bled and left. But the sickest part? I wanted them to leave. So I could say, "See, I was right. I needed to be right. More than I needed to be loved. Because if they loved me, and they were right, I would have to live up to it. I would have to accept that maybe I wasn't worthless, that maybe I had a soul still capable of being seen. And I wasn't ready for that. I was never ready for that. You think I'm exaggerating, that surely there were moments of tenderness. There were. But I infected them, I poisoned them with questions. What do you see in me? What are you pretending not to see? Who are you confusing me with? I asked with a smile, but I meant every word. And when they hesitated, even for a second, I attacked. That hesitation, that flicker of doubt, was my proof, my ammunition. "Ah, so even you don't know," I'd say. "You love an idea, not me." I made them feel foolish for caring. And when they left, I pitied them for having loved someone so clearly unlovable. I called it their weakness. But inside, I envied it. I envied their ability to feel, to risk, to hurt. I, on the other hand, sat behind my wall, untouched, unclaimed, unspoiled, and utterly irrelevant. There is a peculiar cruelty in punishing someone for loving you. It leaves no mark on them, not immediately. They walk away confused, hurt, perhaps even a little ashamed. But they heal. They move on. They find someone less complicated. Meanwhile, you stay behind with the echo of what might have been. You replay their kindness in your head, again and again, until it becomes unbearable. And then, you blame them for making you remember, for making you feel, for daring to believe you were worth it. I told myself I was unlovable, and I worked hard to make it true. I rejected compliments. I twisted every good moment into a trap. I rehearsed failure before success ever had a chance. I made jokes about myself before anyone else could. I made them laugh so they wouldn't look too closely. I was terrified of being loved and then failing to deserve it. Because what if they stayed? What if they insisted? What if someone said, "I see all of you and I'm not leaving"? That would destroy me. That would force me to become someone who could receive such grace. and I didn't know how. I still don't. So instead, I clung to the idea that anyone who loved me must be wrong. That way, I could dismiss their affection without facing the terrifying task of growing into it. I remember one woman, quiet, patient, far too gentle for a man like me, who once said, "You don't have to earn everything. Some things are given." And I laughed. I laughed so hard she flinched. I called her naive. I mocked her idea of love. I told her the world doesn't work that way, and maybe it doesn't. But maybe I just couldn't bear to believe it did. Because if love is given freely, without merit, then all my excuses fall apart. Then I can no longer hide behind being undeserving. Then I must admit that I turned away not from cruelty, but from mercy. There is no defense against mercy. You can reject it, spit on it, but you can't argue with it. It doesn't follow logic. And for someone like me who built an entire fortress out of logic, mercy was the most terrifying invasion of all. So I told myself again and again, if they love me, they don't know me. If they love me, they're confused. If they love me, they're wrong. And eventually, I believed it. I stopped even testing it. I stopped letting it approach. I stayed alone, not because no one came, but because I made sure they never stayed. It's funny, isn't it? I spent my life fearing abandonment, and then ensured it happened just so I could say it wasn't my fault. Just so I could stay blameless in my pain. But the truth? I abandoned them first, every time. Quietly, strategically, and always with a clever little justification at the ready. So when you ask me why I'm alone, don't believe the performance. Don't listen to the lines about independence or intellectual solitude or moral clarity. The truth is this: I pushed everyone away because the thought of being loved, truly loved, was more unbearable than any loneliness I could imagine. Because if they loved me, they'd be wrong, and I couldn't live with that. There's one lie I told myself more than any other. It sat quietly behind every monologue, every silence, every rejection I rehearsed in my head. I told myself I preferred to be alone. That solitude was strength, that to be untouched, unseen, unbothered was freedom. It sounded noble, even poetic. I wrapped it in language, in reason, in some pitiful imitation of philosophy. But it was a lie. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be seen alone. That's the truth. That's the final humiliation I can no longer escape. I didn't choose isolation to escape others. I chose it so others would see me choosing it. I needed an audience, even for my misery, especially for my misery. Because what is solitude, really, if no one witnesses it? What is the point of withdrawing if there's no one left to wonder where you went? I crafted my life like a stage play. Every failure, every insult, every retreat from the world, I imagined it as part of a grand design. I would be the tragic figure, misunderstood, superior, unyielding. I envisioned onlookers who would speak of me in hushed tones. He is strange, yes, but brilliant. Or, he is cold, but surely he has suffered. And most of all, he chose this. As if I were some kind of monk of the intellect, some priest of moral clarity, who had turned his back on the vulgarities of common existence. But I didn't turn away from the world. I hovered just outside it, glaring through the glass, praying someone would look back. I didn't run into the wilderness. I sat in the hallway of the world, where I could still hear the music, smell the warmth, feel the shadows of movement. I positioned myself where I could be ignored, but not forgotten. That was the difference. That was my condition. I didn't want to be invisible. I wanted to be absent, noticeably, painfully absent. The kind of absence that demands interpretation. And when no one noticed, I grew violent. Not in deed, but in thought. I imagined disasters, deaths, illnesses. I fantasized about people arriving too late, crying at the wrong time, realizing their error only when I had slipped away for good. I wanted regret. I wanted it like oxygen, not for justice, not even for love, but to prove that I had mattered, that I had existed somewhere in their memories, if not in their affections. I needed witnesses, not to admire me, not even to understand me, just to record my existence, to nod and say, yes, he was here, he suffered. That would have been enough. But you see, the world doesn't offer witnesses for your private tragedies. It moves forward, it forgets, it doesn't owe you a memory, it doesn't stop to write down your silence. And when I realized that, truly realized it, I broke. Not all at once, slowly. I stopped speaking, then I stopped writing. Then I stopped leaving my room, and eventually I stopped believing even in the importance of being seen. But the need remained. Even now, as I write this or speak this, whatever this is, I am not speaking into a void. I am speaking to you, to someone, to anyone. Because despite everything, despite the pride, the hatred, the withdrawal, I have never stopped needing a listener. My greatest torment has never been loneliness itself, but the suspicion that my loneliness is meaningless, that it was not profound, that it did not mark me as unique or tragic or wise, but only as forgotten. And there is nothing more unbearable than that. Do you know what happens when no one watches your pain? It curdles, it calcifies, it loses all elegance. Suffering without witness is not romantic, it is grotesque. It turns inward, feeding on itself, growing smaller and louder until your mind becomes a chamber of echoes. You scream, and the only voice that answers is your own, distorted. You beg for recognition, and the silence replies, "There is no one here." So I created my own witnesses, fantasies, ghosts. I reimagined past lovers, old friends, even enemies. I rehearsed conversations with them, arguments, confessions. I placed them in the seats of an invisible theater where they would observe me pacing, mumbling, unraveling, and they would be moved, touched, perhaps even changed. But they never existed, and those who did, they left. Or maybe they didn't leave. Maybe I left first, just to say it was mine. My choice, my exile, my narrative. Because if they left on their own, I would be no different than anyone else. I would be just another man whose presence became irrelevant. And that I could never allow. I would rather be hated than dismissed. I would rather be feared than ignored. I would rather be alone, sobbing in a filthy room, than sit quietly among people who never noticed I was there. Yes, I needed witnesses, even for my shame, even for my decay. I wanted someone to watch me fall and say he chose this. That was the story I clung to. The illusion that made it bearable. But here now, at the end of all these illusions, I must confess, I didn't choose it. I wanted to be loved, not by many, just by one. Truly, quietly, without hesitation. I wanted someone to stay, not because they were trapped, not because I had guilted them, but because they saw me and stayed anyway. And I destroyed that, again and again, out of fear, out of pride, out of the terrible belief that if I allowed myself to be loved, I would owe something in return. Forgiveness, softness, maybe even change. So I built a temple out of my loneliness, lit candles for my pain, sang hymns to my silence, and waited for someone to pass by and find it sacred. No one came, and now the candles have burned out. The walls are cracked. The echo no longer answers. There is only me, and this final pathetic realization: I never wanted to be alone. I wanted to be watched, alone. And now, I am simply alone.